I forgot our background music.
All right. All right, perfect. Well, thanks everyone for joining us again today. Today's Workers' Compensation Course 102, Return to Work. Jordyn Cagney is going to be walking us through this more in-depth course and taking your questions as we go. This is a live presentation, so if you'd like to come off mute and simply ask the question, do not hesitate to join in the conversation. With that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Pinnacle's own Jordyn Cagney. Jordyn.
Hi, I'm Jordyn Cagney, as he said, and I very much want to emphasize that absolutely ask questions throughout. I'd love for this to be more conversational. I think your experiences paired with, what I'm teaching about helps to make this more dynamic, more engaging, and more relevant to you. So jump in anytime. I'm Jordyn Cagney. If you didn't attend the last seminar that I did, I'll just give you a little background on me and my experience. I come from state vocational rehabilitation prior to my time at Pinnacol. So I was helping individuals with disabilities gain employment, helping them remove barriers. So I'm very familiar with trying to accommodate work and come up with creative solutions when, people can't do the typical regular type of job. I've been at Pinnacol for 7 years now and love it. It's great. I've been a return to work consultant that whole time. And I'm just really excited to be talking to you guys today. So let's get going here. So as you know, this is a deep dive into return to work. So I'm going to be getting a lot more in depth than I normally do in our short little 101 sections. So to kind of talk more about processes and what things look like. But I do like to cover the basics, especially if some of you on here weren't able to attend the last 101 presentation. So let's just talk about what modified duty actually is. We like to think of it as the 3 T's, and those T's are task specific, temporary, and transitional. So I'll run through what each one of those means. So when it comes to modified duty, task specific means that we're only thinking in terms of the duties that you have available. We kind of disregard normal job descriptions, things like that, because we're just thinking about what is this person able to do in terms of their physical limitations, what specific duties would fit within that. So this affords us a lot of creativity. It allows us to think outside of the box and come up with things that maybe this person wouldn't normally do. Maybe these things have nothing to do with their regular job description, or maybe they would do a piece or a portion of their regular job. But either way, what we're thinking about is just task by task by task, not necessarily creating a whole new job. I like to encourage people to, think of special projects that this person can do while they're on restrictions, or to ask your other staff members if there's anything that maybe they could take off of their plate to free them up to do different productive work and alleviate some of the burden on your, not restricted workers to give to your injured workers, things like that. Think of if you had endless manpower in your workforce, what are the things that would get done? The things that maybe are lower priority that you would love to have done, but maybe don't have the ability to get done on a regular basis. Those are things an injured worker could do. So like I said, really out of the box thinking is afforded to you with modified duty because we're not constrained by this person's normal job descriptions. We're only constrained by the restrictions provided by the doctor. When we say temporary, again, like I mentioned, we're not creating a job for this person, and we certainly aren't creating any long-term opportunity. So when we talk about modified duty in terms of a work comp claim, this is totally designed to be during this person's recovery while they can't do their regular job, work that we provide them to help their recovery, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But if they're provided with long-term restrictions, sometimes at the end of the claim, the person doesn't get back to square one. If the restrictions become permanent, it becomes a different deal. It's not modified duty anymore. So anything we talk about today is temporary modified duty while they are on temporary restrictions from the doctor while they're going through the healing process. So again, we're not creating any jobs. Even if your injured worker really likes this position, you're not guaranteeing that you would provide this type of work indefinitely. It's only for the period of their recovery. And then transitional. So this is really important because it allows you some room for growth. Some people that I work with, they have one set of modified duty tasks, and those are what they have, and that's what they're going to provide for the entirety of this person's recovery until they're released to regular duty. And some people will change it as this person grows and as their restrictions change. So we encourage transitional work that grows with the injured worker's abilities. That way you're using them to the full extent of their abilities, as well as hopefully getting them closer and closer to their regular job. Now, we totally understand if what you have is filing and shredding in the office, and other than that they've got to be full duty in the field, that's totally fine. If there isn't a lot of opportunity to move the work around and make it transitional, I wouldn't get too hung up on that. But if there are opportunities to change this person as they grow and as they're able to do more and more, certainly that's going to be of great benefit to their recovery process. I'll stop right here and just ask if there's any questions about anything that we've covered thus far. All right, off we go. Okay, so why modified duty? This is one of the most common questions that I get when I'm talking to customers is, why do we bother offering modified duty? What's the point? Isn't it better for the person's recovery for them to sit home and wait until they're at full duty? Are we putting them at risk by bringing them back in the workforce before they're fully healed? Why would I pay somebody to do a job that is really not their job and, have them do menial tasks that I don't really need? Well, there's a couple reasons, and they're both really, really big reasons. One is that it improves your bottom line, and the other is that it benefits your injured workers' recovery. So call that a win-win-win, I suppose, where it's helping you, it's helping them, and it's helping everybody. So let's talk about some of the data that supports this notion. Pinnacol took all of our claims in the year 2015, and we came up with some analysis and some averages. So an indemnity claim, for those unfamiliar with the term, is a claim where there is lost time being paid out. And just to give a little bit of background, lost time is paid when an injured worker starts missing time from work as a result of the injury. We don't pay for the first 3 days, and then we initiate lost time benefits if they're still missing time. That's a very simplified version. There's obviously a lot more to it, but if they're missing time, we will pay for it if it is a result of the injury. So an indemnity claim, if we average them all up for year 2015, we get $26,361. That was the average cost of a claim that involved a lost time component. Medical only claims were an average of $821. So that's a pretty significant difference between those two figures. And just to explain, what does that mean to you? So claims costs can impact premium, and premium is obviously, affecting your bottom line as a business. We want to do everything we can to help you guys protect your bottom line, to control costs, and to help you do business more effectively. And offering modified duty work is a really powerful tool to impacting the cost of those claims. And we're going to get into it. It impacts your injured worker as well. So it's not just all about money. It's protecting the worker, and it's doing good by them as well. So we're helping you control that cost and helping you keep that worker safe and happy and healthy, and as part of that. So again, indemnity, lost time claims, far more expensive. We're helping you hopefully effectively manage these claims so that you can help to control your bottom line. So let's talk about the impact to the worker, because that's super important as well. Your workers are your most valuable asset. We know that, we recognize that. We want to provide them with the best possible care and the best possible experience going through an injury. This thing has likely shaken up their entire life. So what we want to do is help minimize the long-term impacts and the short-term impacts that an injury has on them. So a study was done in Washington, and what it found was that the longer that somebody is off of work because of a work comp injury, the more that they can expect their long-term earnings to be reduced. So that's pretty significant. And this doesn't just look at, somebody working at the same job. So if you're the employer, their earnings at your business, it looked at their long-term earnings potential during their working career. So if somebody is off of work up to 3 months as a result of the work comp injury, their earnings potential was 3.5% less than somebody who wasn't injured. And it just goes up from there, 11.6% if they're off 3 to 12 months, and 28% if they're off over 3 years. So pretty significant in terms of the impact that this can have to this person, to their family, their livelihood. We want to do as much as we can to prevent this type of impact to their life. This injury should not derail will derail their whole existence. And I know it seems like 3 months, oh, well, that's a really long time, well, somebody being injured, we'll let them be off work for a little while, but 3 months, that's a really long time. That's a whole quarter. But honestly, it's pretty common, with injured workers going to the doctor usually about once a month, and, restrictions can be slow to change. If you feel like you can't accommodate and we're not thinking outside the box and coming up with those creative solutions, it can easily get to 3 months that somebody has been off of work in a blink of an eye. It feels like it's almost like quarantine time. It passes by very quickly. Any questions about that? Another impact of early return to work is just getting this person back into the workforce. So this has a global impact. This impacts this person's life. This impacts society. We don't want to lose a good worker in our American workforce. Basically, the study found, also done in Washington, that the more time that somebody was off of work, the less likely they were to ever return to work. So if they were off of work back to work 3 months or less, they have about a 92% likelihood of coming back to work and getting back into the workforce. So things are still looking pretty good at that point. But it goes down to about 50% if they're off of work for 6 months. So 50% likelihood they're never coming back to the workforce. This could be a permanent disability situation, or for whatever reason they're not getting back. And it just goes down from there. So we want to try to get these people back to work, protect their long-term earnings potential, and also just not lose that worker, not lose them from your business, not lose them from the workforce. We want to get them back as early as possible to prevent these long-term impacts. Okay, any questions about why we offer modified duty in terms of your bottom line or the impact to the injured worker? Great. So that's data that supports it. And, I'll just tell you anecdotally, we know that offering modified duty has a profound impact on how the claim goes. When we get involved, and I say we, return to work consultants, our whole department is here to try to get people back to work. That's what we do. And when we're involved with claims, they tend to be shorter, and they tend to involve less services. So my favorite example is, when we have somebody who's off of work and the customer really can't accommodate, and we understand that sometimes that happens, but if they're off of work for a pretty significant amount of time, sometimes the doctors will prescribe what's called work hardening. And essentially this is simulated work that we pay, a medical professional to facilitate so that they can be, habilitated and strengthened enough to re-enter the workforce, because without any work activity, the doctor doesn't feel confident that they would have the strength to just jump right back in the workforce. They need to build up to that. So that goal can usually be accomplished if they're offered modified duty and they're able to remain working in a temporary and transitional position. We're accomplishing that same goal of a therapeutic intervention by just keeping them working. Another thing we see is just the mental aspect of being off of work. I think at this point in 2020/2021, we can all relate to that. A lot of us have been working remote, and, it's a huge jarring change in routine. So if you think about being injured, not only are you dealing with an injury, but you might be home, cut off from your coworkers, your work family, from work you enjoy doing, from the normalcy of your routine. And as we all know at this point, that can be a lot for your mental health. So it's really good for our injured workers to stay engaged. And I think it communicates great caring when you make the effort to get somebody back to work and communicate to them that they're a valuable part of your workplace, and that even if they can't do their regular job, you're going to do your best to fit them into the workplace still, because they matter and they're part of your ecosystem. All right, so that's why we offer modified duty. Let's talk about when we offer modified duty. So the claim starts when the injury happens, right? Things get rolling. Basically, as soon as this person has restrictions, you are welcome to offer modified duties. So by all means, if they get released to work the first day that they go into the doctor, that's a prime opportunity to go ahead and get them back. They don't miss any time. Awesome. That's the ideal situation. Sometimes that's not always realistic. Sometimes the doctor does keep them off of work for a period, or maybe when they are first released, it's really stringent restrictions that don't make sense for your business. We can revisit this at any point. So I frequently will talk to people, and it doesn't make sense right now because they can't use their injured arm, and that's just not something that they can work with. But if they could lift 5 pounds, we've got a couple things for them to do. So we wait, we check, we monitor, and we act as soon as we can to get them back to work. So whenever it makes sense for you and your business, that's a great opportunity to offer modified duty. The only times we can't is if they are not able to work. So let's talk about kind of the team approach. Who is involved in this process? Every team member here that I'm going to list is very vital to getting somebody successfully back to work. And the first is you, the employer. So you're essentially calling the shots in terms of what the work looks like and how it's structured, and coming up with the ideas for modified duty. You get to decide, rate of pay, things like that. And just to touch on that, when it comes to modified duty, things are really flexible, not just in tasks, but in hours and in wages as well. So you have a lot of decisions you get to make, but you're right there in the middle of all of it, trying to figure out what's going on. Another very important role of the employer is touching base with the injured worker. And sometimes we see this and sometimes we don't. But I can tell you that when injured workers hear from their employers and when they're checking in regularly, that makes a huge difference, makes them feel less isolated, makes them feel, like they're not being punished for the injury. These are just things we hear every so often. And usually there's no malice intended on the part of the employer if they haven't touched base. It's just they're letting that person heal and giving them time. But I can tell you that the more you communicate with the injured worker about what's going on, and the more in touch you guys can stay and know what's going on. And if they are having to be off of work, it's just a great way to stay connected with them and make sure you know what's going on in their life and how this injury is impacting them. So highly recommend you stay in touch. And also, since we are talking about modified duty here, it's very important to be talking to your workers about your intent to get them back to work as quickly as possible, even if it's not happening right now. These conversations can happen far before an injury occurs. In fact, we encourage that. We encourage the idea of return to work to be part of your workplace culture. So if you have the opportunity to bring those up, maybe at safety meetings or all employee meetings, whenever you talk about topics like this, communicating that it is always going to be your intent to bring somebody back to work to modified duty can really help set the stage so that if an injury does occur, this person isn't thinking, oh, they're trying to punish me by bringing me back to work or, anything like that. They know that this is part of who you are as a business and that they're going to have to expect to come back to work as soon as it makes sense for their restrictions. So moving on, you, the employer, super important to this whole process. The injured worker is really important as well. I think they're a really valuable resource when you're planning for modified duty because oftentimes they know their job inside and out, and they might know, other things that need to be done around the workplace. So they're a really good resource just for planning some modified duty tasks. They might know some things that they think that they could do. But the more connected and engaged they are in the process, the more they feel like, they actually have some choice and some power in the situation. I think the better things feel overall and the more successful it's going to be. Now, there is the little asterisk always. There are some injured workers that simply don't want to return to work. I can tell you that they're in the minority. They're not the overwhelming amount of injured workers as those that truly don't want to come back to work. Those cases are obviously going to be more difficult. Certainly our return to work consultants are here to help deal with those challenging circumstances. And we'll talk a little bit about some challenges near the end here today. But for the most part, most injured workers want to get back to work. And if they don't, sometimes it's just a matter of they're in pain. They're scared. They are worried about re-injury, things like that. So when we make them part of the process and make them a key part of the team in terms of getting them back on the job, it's really helpful. And I think empowers them to feel more safe and more comfortable and like they do have some control over their situation. All right. The designated provider, they're setting all the rules here. The doctor sets the restrictions. We absolutely have to defer to them. We can always ask questions. We can ask for clarification if we don't understand things, if we don't get what the treatment plan is, where we're going, why things are the way they are, we can ask, but we cannot tell the doctor to change restrictions. We can't direct care, anything like that. If they say, here's the restrictions, that's it. Other than finding out a little bit more just for our own knowledge, we have to accept what they're saying. They are managing the medical care. They are the professional, so we have to defer to them. It can be a little frustrating, I can tell you right now, I'm working on a claim where the restrictions have changed in a week and a half, 3 different times. We've been working on trying to get this person back to work. It's a little bit of a litigious and contentious situation. And anytime that we've tried to make an offer of work that fits within the restrictions, the injured worker has gone back to the doctor, and the doctor has decided to change the restrictions, make them worse, and undo all of the work that we've done. So it can be a little bit frustrating sometimes that the doctor holds all the power, but we just got to stay engaged. We got to stay communicating and kind of roll with the punches sometimes. This is not obviously a common scenario, but it does happen. And I just want to say that if it's happened with you, recognize it. I understand your frustrations. I'm right there with you. But we're always happy to partner to kind of deal with what the doctor's saying and help come up with the best solutions to try to figure out how to make it work. But ultimately, the doctor is setting those restrictions, and we are working with them, and we are making sure that all work fits within the restrictions. So that is the very important role of being the designated provider. Return to work consultant. So we are here to help. That is what I would love for you to walk away from here knowing, is that you don't have to manage this on your own. You don't have to be the sole person on the expedition of getting somebody back to work. We are here to help you. We are here to put our knowledge of work comp and accommodations, pair it with your knowledge of your business and how you do things, and hopefully come up with some really great ideas in how to keep your injured workers working. Because that's what it's ultimately all about, is just to keep them working, again, to control your bottom line and to improve their recovery. So please use us. We are here to, I like to say, we'll kind of do what you want. If you want us to hold your hand, we'll hold your hand. If we're linking arms, great. If we need to be crawling in the trenches with you, whatever you need, whatever kind of support you need, we're here to provide it. And we always just want to make sure that you can be successful in your efforts to get somebody back to work. And then finally, the injured worker supervisor and team. So this is the group that most frequently gets left out of these discussions, but I can say it's really helpful when we get supervisors and team members involved, simply because the more the merrier in terms of keeping this person safe and healthy in the workplace when they're injured. For one thing, the supervisor might have some really great ideas of how to fit this person into the workplace. For another, it might be kind of challenging to fit them in the workplace. So if we bring the supervisor in the decision-making process, then we have some buy-in there. And then if it is, challenging to kind of rearrange work and figure out how we keep this person working, and they're the ones kind of stuck with all the chores involved with keeping an injured worker on the job, they've got that buy-in, they understand the process, they understand why we're doing it. So it's really important there. And I say the team because we want to make sure this person stays safe, right? So if we know we have a person with a lifting restriction and, another team member knows, hey, we can't ask them to do anything that violates their restrictions, then if they see something, they can say something, right? If they see this person lifting a 20-pound box when we all know that they can only lift 10 pounds, then we can have those conversations, supervisor to injured worker, about how he's not supposed to be violating restrictions, that sort of thing. And everybody can work together to keep this person safe and ultimately just make it a positive, successful experience. Certainly we've heard things like, oh, if I bring them back to do this work, then everybody's going to get mad because this person's doing so much less and they have to pick up the slack. I get that. That would be a really tough position to be in. Communication is helpful. If it was any one of those other workers, you'd be doing the same thing, right? We're all doing the best with the situation we have, and this person is currently injured and they're not just slacking off. They have an injury and we are keeping them safe. So it's all about developing that culture so that people know that if they are injured or anybody else is injured, they're going to be coming back to work and they're going to be kept safe. And we're going to do whatever we can to make sure that this return to work experience doesn't hurt their recovery. So communication is helpful with all of these different players in the game. Any questions? So hopefully some of you have seen this document. It is the WC 164 form, and it is the form used by most designated providers, not all, but most, to outline restrictions. And so the section that is super relevant to me and what I do is right there in the middle where it says limitations and restrictions. I don't know if you guys can see my mouse, but this bad boy right here, this work status lets us know what we're working with. Sometimes it's very clear. They can lift up to 10 pounds. They, can't use their right arm. They need to be seated. Sometimes it is as clear as mud and we have no idea what they're talking about, like can bend occasionally. Okay, what does that mean in the context of our actual work environment? My favorite one that I've seen is no tasks requiring clear mentation. So no thinking involved. You can't do any tasks with thinking. So that was a fun one to try to problem solve what that might mean. Anyway, we use this information to guide what we're doing. And if any questions are generated when you look at this, this is a good opportunity to contact the designated provider and say, hey, we don't understand what that means. I'm going to talk in a little bit about another way that we can clarify return to work information using this form and others. Any questions about this? Frequently, we can't actually even read what's written on the form too, so that's really fun. Although I do pride myself on being able to read doctor handwriting at this point in my career, so it's a special skill that I'm going to put on my resume. Okay, verbal versus formal offers. People get really excited about this, or at least people in my discipline get excited about this. I don't know about the general public. But once we've kind of done all the work and figured out how we're going to bring this person back to work in terms of tasks and schedule and all that, okay, now we have to actually get them back to work, right? So we need to talk about tactically, how do we make that happen? So there's kind of the easy peasy way, and then there's a little bit more complicated way, and they both have their merits. So I'll walk you through each one. The first one is what we call a verbal offer. Exactly what it sounds like, although it doesn't necessarily have to be verbal talking, but it means that you just offer them work. You can call them, text them, email them, whatever preferred mode of communication, carrier, pigeon, airplane sign, what are those things called? Air sign. However you want to communicate that you've got work for this person within their restrictions and you want them back to work, go ahead and do that. And then if they come back, cool, we're done. That's the whole process. So like I said, it's called a verbal offer or an informal offer. The benefits to that way are that it is faster, it's easier, and that ultimately it allows the claims representative to adjust benefits based on the terms of their working arrangement. So obviously, if you ask them to come back to work and you say, we've got work for you tomorrow, and they come back tomorrow, that is very quick, right? We might not have lost any time at all. What I will say is that we only want to go down this path if we have an engaged injured worker who wants to come back to work, and also that we as the employer, the person setting restrictions, or sorry, not setting restrictions, setting the modified duty, have a good understanding that the work does fit the work restrictions. So when you're making an informal offer, I think it's really important that you feel comfortable that the work does fit within the work restrictions. Again, sometimes it's very clear cut, seated duty. We know what that means. They have to be seated. So we know if something is seated or not. But if it involves, may bend occasionally and no repetitive lifting over 5 pounds and, a little bit more vague restrictions like that, if you're not solid in terms of your understanding of what those restrictions are and whether the work fits into it, I would say that we want to take it a little bit further and go with the formal offer. The formal offer is kind of our bread and butter here in the return to work discipline. We're facilitating these bad boys all day long. And it's a legal document. And so we follow a process. It's outlined in Rule 6 of the Workers' Comp Statute. And when we are done with this process, we have a document that we can submit to the Division of Workers' Compensation that allows the claims rep to adjust benefits. But unlike the informal offer, where we have to have proof that this person has returned to work and is earning wages, if we do the formal offer, if the person chooses not to accept it, we still can make the adjustment to those wages. So it is a strong protective measure when the injured worker maybe isn't compliant. Sometimes it's just helpful as a communication tool. So we don't have to have, a resistant worker to go down this path, but certainly if there's red flags, I always say, let's go ahead and get this process started. It does take a little bit longer. It is not the quick and easy, get your injured worker back to work tomorrow process. But what it is very clearly documented, doctor approved, and safe and secure because you have followed all the elements of the law. So what does this process look like? First, we send what's called a task letter to the physician. And so what this is a checklist essentially of all of the duties that you have available and a list of, what tasks you're going to have them do as well as the schedule. We send this to the physician. The injured worker is copied by law and gets a copy in the same manner on the same day as the doctor. And if there's an attorney involved, we go ahead and include them too because it's the legal requirement of the law. Like I mentioned, the requirement is that everything is sent in the same manner on the same day. So oftentimes that means we have to mail this document. We do have occasionally the opportunity to send it via email if the injured worker has consented to electronic communication and the doctor's office also participates in electronic communication. So those are the things that your return to work consultant, whether it's me or one of our other wonderful consultants, will manage on your behalf. So we'll actually put this document together with you. Obviously, we will defer to you in terms of what the tasks in the schedule are. And then we will create and send the document, make sure everything follows the law. We're going to follow it to the letter. We do this day in and day out. We know Rule 6 like the back of our own hands, maybe even better. So we send the task letter to the physician. Once the doctor signs off, we see what they approved. Ideally, everything would be approved, right? But sometimes we're sending things to see if they might be approved. That's another element of this that is really helpful in the process is if we're not sure if somebody can do something, we create this task letter and it clarifies that right up because the doctor says, here's what the tasks are, okay, yes or no. So now we know what this person can and can't do, and then we're able to figure out what is the offer that we want to make. What are the wages we want to pay? What are the hours we want to offer? That sort of thing. You can reduce a wage if it makes sense for modified duty. It doesn't have to be their full wage. You can reduce hours. You can change hours. What we're always looking for when we offer somebody modified duty is that it is reasonable. So please keep that in mind as you're thinking and planning. And reasonability comes into play most specifically with schedule changes. That's where we really have to question, whether something's going to work out or not in terms of whether it's reasonable for this injured worker. So sometimes, let's say you have a night shift worker and they do something, heavy labor that they definitely cannot do within their work restrictions. You could totally switch them to a day shift so that there might be some administrative or, very light duty possibilities. However, if this person has a legitimate reason for not being able to switch to day shift, we have to be reasonable about that. If they were regularly expected to only work nights as part of their hiring agreement, it doesn't really make sense to shift them to days. If a schedule change would impact their ability to get to and from work, let's say they take the bus or they rely on rides from a family member who's also traveling in the same direction, and all of a sudden you have them coming to work a couple hours later and that ride isn't available or that bus route isn't available, something like that, not reasonable. We have to be reasonable. If you're looking at switching a schedule and this person has a schedule that normally works around their childcare needs, and all of a sudden you're trying to say work a different time and they wouldn't have childcare, not reasonable. Our goal is going to be to make sure, obviously we want it to be safe for the injured worker. We want it to work for you and your business and your needs. But also that if we stood before a judge and tried to say, we did this offer in good faith, it's reasonable, this person could accept, and then they chose not to, that we've got all our ducks in a row. So we want this thing to be solid as a rock when we do it. So we're going to cover these things if any of that stuff is in question. So schedule, reasonability, transportation. Going back to the task letter, the doctor signs it, and then we issue an offer of modified duty along with that signed letter. So the injured worker is going to receive the letter signed by the physician, as well as a letter that says, here's the wage we're going to pay you. Here's what time you're supposed to report to work. Here's your supervisor's name and contact information. Here's the exact physical address of where you show up to work. Even if it's the place they've been showing up every day for the past 20 years, we are going to write that address down to the zip code. And then we give them a certain number of days to report to work. 3 business days if we're able to email that letter, or also as the employer, you have the right to hand deliver it. And we have to give them 7 business days if we have to mail it. Again, these are all things that if you're working with a return to work consultant, we are going to ask you very specific questions so that we can create the document on your behalf and make sure it covers all the bases of Rule 6 so that we come out of it with a legally binding document. So we issue that, and on that report date indicated on the letter, hopefully they show up. We want them to show up. That's the best case scenario, is that you get them there and they're able to do good, productive work for you and benefit their recovery. But even if they choose not to, then we're going to use that to adjust down benefits or prevent the payment of benefits, depending on where we are in terms of their eligibility for lost time benefits in the claim. And that's what that process does. It is, again, a very handy tool. And I have customers that prefer to do it for every single injured worker. And I have some where, it just kind of depends on the situation. Either way is fine. Just, again, walk out of this knowing that when it comes to return to work, ask your consultant and we'll help you problem solve and figure out what's going to be the best solution for you. Also, this process can be far more involved than this. So again, kind of a quick snapshot, case by case situation. We'll talk through details. So just know that it can be a little bit more involved than this, but we'll help you through it. Does anybody have any questions about this? All right. Okay, nonprofit placement. This is the topic du jour right now because it's kind of a new thing and it's kind of a big deal because we spent many years trying to make sure that we could kind of embark on this journey without any issues in terms of like liability risk and then that would be successful. So let's say, for example, I'm going to use the most common industry, trucking, that uses this opportunity. Your trucking business, you have a small office, you have 2 people that work in that office, they have finite set of duties that nobody else can do. It's confidential information. You've got your HR person and your ops manager, and that's it in terms of the office. Every single other employee is out on the road, they're driving their trucks. There's no place for them to go to, and if they can't drive a truck, there's no modified duty. There's no place for them to come clean. They don't have the ability to do administrative work. There truly is no modified duty at your business if they can't do their regular job. Totally happens. What can we do? We want to impact our bottom line, and we want to help this injured worker recover. That's where nonprofit placement comes in. So Pinnacol is partnering with a number of nonprofits in the community. We've got, I think, 6 or 7 in our library right now, and ever working to expand and offer up this opportunity to other nonprofits in the Colorado state. So what we do is we facilitate a placement for volunteer work. So this person, I'm going to use the ARC because that's our most common one. This person, we could arrange a modified duty placement at the ARC doing volunteer work. So they're, as far as the ARC is concerned, a volunteer, but as far as you're concerned, they're still your employee, and you're going to pay them wages for going to do that volunteer work. So we're offsetting the lost time benefits and thus controlling the costs of the claim. And this person is still getting to do work activity, albeit not at the business. So it's a really great opportunity to get people working when there truly are no options. And additionally, you're doing something great for the community, right? You're sending one of your workers who would be sitting at home out to volunteer and impact these organizations that do great work. So it's a really great chance to impact a lot of different variables. Being that there's a third party involved, there's obviously complications. Again, as a return to work consultant, I'm going to be having a lot of conversations with you. I'm going to be having a lot of conversations with the injured worker. We're going to be making sure that this is safe and that the nonprofit can meet the restrictions and understands what this person can and can't do. You as the employer would determine how much you're willing to pay for this experience and how many hours you would want that person to go. But all in all, what it comes down to is it's a creative way to keep somebody working when there really isn't any option at your business. Any questions about this?
Yes, Jordyn, this is Kay. I just had a quick question. So
Sure.
If it is with the nonprofit and even, if you've gone over restrictions, et cetera, what type, if this person still does something like lift 20 pounds when they're only supposed to lift 10 or whatever, and there's no supervisor around directly or anyone on behalf of the employer, how does that affect a claim if they increase their injury based off of this work?
Yeah, totally. So basically the risk is the same as if they were at home or at your business. Basically, if an injured worker exacerbates an injury, then we're pretty much in charge of that unless, we can really definitively prove that they violated restrictions. But the liability is still there, that there could be injury, exacerbation, or re-injury at the ARC. So that's the ARC or any of our nonprofits. So it's something to weigh in, if that liability is worth the risk to you, because they're still your employee working there. And yeah, there's not as much oversight, right? We do a lot of communication to make sure that the ARC knows that, that this is what this person is or is not able to do, but ultimately there is some risk. So that's something we would have a conversation about to see if that risk is worth it to you. One thing to keep in mind is that even if this person never returns to work, and if they are, have an ankle injury and they're doing well and they trip on the curb coming in from the grocery store, we still are kind of on the hook for that. So there is risk always, no matter what this person is doing. But certainly there's an element of risk that you need to be, has to be within your risk tolerance to move forward with an opportunity like this.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, when you're talking about drivers in ARC type positions, I know that the temptation may be there to help.
Yeah, totally. And I was actually just having a conversation with somebody I have placed at a nonprofit, and he is supposed to do seated work only. I maybe I'm like a little bit paranoid and a little bit of a control freak when it comes to these types of things, but I like check and double check and make sure the work is seated and make sure that, the supervisor at the ARC store knows, and make sure that the injured worker knows, like, nobody violates restrictions. You stay seated the whole time. But he called me and he was like, every time I get done with my set of tasks, in order to get a new set of work, they have work, they're accommodating me, nobody's making me stand. But the only way I can get new work to do and not just be sitting there idle is I have to walk around the store and find the supervisor, and then I'm on my feet and I'm like, no. Stop that right now. Let's find out a different solution. But yeah, like, there's nobody there telling him like, you can't stand, like, they're just a volunteer manager. So it's definitely a lot of communication that needs to happen amongst all the parties. But we can't account for everything. And sometimes, things like that certainly could happen.
Thanks.
Oops, sorry. Oh, we're almost done. Spoiled the ending. So managing injured workers on modified duty. So, every time I feel like I've gotten the hang of my job over the course of 7 years and I know exactly what to do and how to handle every situation, something else pops up and I'm like, oh no, how do I deal with this? So just know, even a seasoned professional doesn't know how to handle everything that comes up in the course of a modified duty assignment. What I can say is that, again, communication, I know I said that word a lot during this presentation, but it's really helpful. And we're here to help navigate those troubled waters when it comes to, complicated situations for modified duty, because this is completely out of the norm. This person is not out doing what they're doing normally. They're injured. They might be cranky. They've got a lot of appointments. They've got all sorts of stuff going on in their lives. And it can just make the whole situation very complicated and things just come up. So what I would like you to know is that please bring your problems to me. We have a team of various professionals in all sorts of domains, and they are ready to help me figure out how to solve problems. So whether that is, our attorneys that we have on staff that can help, determine with the law what we do, the claims representatives, our nurse case managers. I have a lot of resources at my disposal, and thus you guys have a lot of resources at your disposal to help problem solve. But one of the biggest issues that comes up is performance issues. So a lot of people feel that they're kind of held hostage when somebody is injured and causing a ruckus. And that's a very uncomfortable feeling, especially when you're seeing the impact it might have on your other workers. It's creating a toxic work environment. So one thing you'll probably hear that could be a little bit frustrating, I would think, as an employer who's deferring to your work comp professionals, is that we won't give employment advice, and we absolutely won't. It's outside of our scope. We cannot tell you how to handle an employment issue with your injured worker. What I can tell you, though, is how things will impact the claim. So when performance issues crop up, know that you can treat your injured worker just like any other worker. So if they come in, and I like to use extreme examples, if they come in and start threatening the workforce and are doing something that is an egregious violation of your policy, you take the action you would take if there was no claim going on. Please don't feel like just because there's a claim, this person is, is calling all the shots. Please do talk to us though, because we can tell you how that will impact the claim. So one of the most powerful tools that I can offer to you is that formal offer. So say you have somebody get injured and maybe they weren't a great injured or they weren't a great worker before they were injured. We just want to go ahead and get a formal offer in place for them so that if something happens, that you guys are covered and you guys are taken care of, or if you make a verbal offer to somebody and they refuse to come in, we want to do a formal offer so that then if they continue that behavior, you guys are protected. But certainly know that, normal employment consequences that would be given out to any other worker, you can still give your injured worker. We just want to talk to what's the liability, what's the risk, what's the exposure you're facing before you take any action. And certainly if you have employment counsel, they're a good person to have in your corner as well. But just know that, just because somebody's injured and is going through a work comp claim does not mean that you can't fire them, provide an employment consequence, that sort of thing. Transportation barriers come up a lot. So I always do like to talk about getting to and from work and how it impacts the claim. And I'm working on one right now. This guy has just been prescribed some medication. That medication, it is not safe for him to drive. And so the doctor has said, yeah, he can do all of these light duty tasks, but he can't drive to and from work because of the medication and he's not safe to drive. So what does that mean for us? Normally, it's up to the injured worker to get themselves to and from work. If the inability to drive is a result of the claim, the injury, then it is the responsibility of the employer to figure out how to get their injured worker to work. So not always realistic, but I just want you to know you do have options. If this person can't drive for whatever reason, maybe they have a broken right ankle or they're taking some sort of medication that makes it unsafe for them to drive. If there's a coworker that's willing to pick them up in the morning and drop them off at night, cool. Covered. If you're willing to pay for an Uber, great. If there is a very reasonable public transportation alternative, and I say that because if it's going to take them 5 times as long to get there on the bus, that's not reasonable. But if they could get there on the bus and their injury would permit them to do so, that's an option. Now, let's say same scenario, can't drive, but the reason they can't drive is because their license was suspended because they decided to get rowdy at the bar one night. That's on them. So just keep in mind that if we have a transportation barrier, if it is a result of the injury, then it is you, the employer's job to figure out how to get them to and from work, or we cannot reasonably expect them to be there. If it's their own deal and they have caused this transportation barrier, whether it's because their car broke down or they don't have a license or their family member who drove them to work is no longer available, that's on them. And communication. The more the better. And certainly if you have a contentious situation, please document everything, that especially, if you think that there's a consequence coming, document everything very, very detailed, just like you would if there was performance issues with anybody else. But the more documentation, the better. Again, our goal is always to protect you. We want this to be a positive, safe experience for everybody. Sometimes not everybody plays ball. And so we want to make sure we're helping you guys, just in case something has to happen, like we need to stand before a judge and say, the reason this person did not get paid lost time benefits is because they did something egregious, violated company policy, and were terminated as a result. And thus they are not due lost wages because there's no injury cause of wage loss. We need to talk through these scenarios on a case-by-case basis, but communicate and document everything you can. And this is just the tip of the iceberg of weird things that can happen in the course of a claim. Thanks. So any other questions that I can answer for you guys, even if they're a little bit more specific or personal to you, happy to answer them. And I'm also available offline if you ever want to chat through return to work issues.
Jordyn?
Mm-hmm.
This is Tony.
Hi, Tony.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
With the current situation that we're in now with COVID,
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just going to throw this example out here. It came up in a conversation not too long ago. You have a worker that's injured on the job. The injury, let's say, was a joint injury and required surgery.
Mm-hmm.
The worker is healed, ready to return to work, able to return to work. tells the employer, you know what, I think I'm at risk. My immune system might be at risk. I don't feel comfortable. Who handles that? Is that the provider or is that the employer?
I think it's kind of everybody. So there certainly is an impact with COVID in terms of return to work and how we have to handle certain situations. Unfortunately for this worker, in that case, what we want to do is kind of separate work comp versus personal stuff. And, if there was no claim going on, what would be happening? Would they have the right to just say, I'm not comfortable returning, and then, okay, that's it, fine, don't come back? Not necessarily. So I think we'd want to extend a formal offer in that case. They could still choose not to come, but it's not part of the work comp claim to compensate them for not feeling comfortable for returning to work. Then we could just very easily transition that to an employment issue that the employer could work on separate from the work comp claim, if that makes sense. So handle it as if there's no claim, and that formal offer is really helpful in that sphere. Okay. To kind of make that separation. Now, if it is a matter of an actual exposure to COVID and you like everybody, have some sort of like specific quarantine rules, and if somebody has an exposure and they need to stay home for 2 weeks or whatever your specific requirements are as a business, that does have a significant impact if there is actually an exposure, whether it is a tested, confirmed exposure or not, especially when it comes to that formal offer process. If we extend a formal offer and this person says, I had a COVID exposure, and your process is that they have to quarantine for 2 weeks upon report of that exposure, we can't reduce their lost time benefits until they go through that quarantine period. So we're now kind of at the point where we're saying you basically get one exposure and 1 2-week quarantine, and after that, like, you got to show up even if you keep reporting you have a COVID exposure. Because I've had it kind of in the thick of it. I had one injured worker who basically every time we had a new offer in place reported she had an exposure, and so it got really frustrating. It was really back and forth, but we are all learning together in this pandemic world. So there's an impact. Uncomfortable versus like legitimate exposure are 2 different things. And, we would want to talk about that just to see how to move forward.
Okay. And I have one quick follow-up. You mentioned it earlier in your presentation about the employee that when you make the offer with restricted duties and limitations to come back to work, then they go back to the provider and the provider changes the criteria for them to come back to work. Can the employer request another provider step in?
No, the employer cannot. The injured worker can, but the employer can't. Basically, once a designated provider is selected, then they're the designated provider. An injured worker is entitled to a one-time change of physician within the first 90 days of a claim, but it has to come from the injured worker. Okay. What I'd say is if you're unhappy because you have a situation going on and this person seems to be working against you and doesn't seem to be providing the quality of care that you would expect and want, change your designated provider list. And then for future claims, hopefully you won't have to have that experience. Unfortunately, you're stuck with it for this one.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
I wanted to mention I see Rob Turner came on, and correct me if I'm wrong, Rob. I believe Baldwin and Associates is who you represent, and also Cindy Sharp. And I apologize, Cindy, I don't see what business you're associated with, but I wanted to reach out to both of you. Thank you for joining us, and ask if you had any questions, because I know you joined a little after we started and want to make sure you had all of your questions answered.
Hi, thank you. This is Cindy Sharp. I do. I don't have any questions. I think you guys did a great job. Thank you very much, Jordyn. And so my husband is self-employed, and I actually work for CSU as the return to work coordinator. So
cool. You know the game.
I know there's always a new situation. There's always something new to figure out.
I know. Every time I think I got a handle on it, I'm like, oh, this is weird.
Jordyn, you were right on. It's an interesting field to be in, that's for sure. So thank you guys for putting these presentations on. Super helpful.
Thank you. Well, and Jordyn, I just had a very minor question about the nonprofit groups that you guys work with. I'm sure there's probably nothing that took place over the last week or so that would make this a contentious issue, but do you allow for any political nonprofit groups to partner with you?
I don't know that we allow or don't allow it. We more look for ones that can accommodate, restricted injured workers. So I don't know that there would be an issue with having one that's politically affiliated, but I don't know, because we are in basically the first year of even having this program. So it just depends on needs of political organizations. Right now, the organizations we partner with are the ARC Thrift Store, Project Cure, Food Bank of Larimer County, and oh gosh, I'm forgetting a couple because they're brand new. But a lot of ones that involve, sorting and organizing of goods, because that kind of opens itself up to a lot of restrictions. But certainly we're always looking for new nonprofits to partner with, and we always give a choice to the injured worker. So maybe, if we can't like force somebody, if they're of one political or religious affiliation, be like, well, go to this church or this political group and go volunteer, that would feel a little icky. But we can always say, these are your options. Does any of this sound good?
I just know from my time in politics that I'm sure both major political parties wouldn't mind having additional people show up to a phone bank and dial to remind people to vote. And I think, thankfully, it sounds like you guys haven't crossed that bridge yet.
No, we're not there yet. We're not there yet.
All right. Well, any other questions? Kay, Diana, do you have anything else?
Jordyn, this is Kay. I did have one more quick question. I agree with you. I think communication is the best way, and a lot of my clients do like to encourage things in their meetings. So when they're talking to them about encouraging this back to work or the restricted duty, et cetera, you had mentioned the study, I think it was slide number 5, about the impact, a 10-year impact.
Yeah.
Is there a way you could get a link of that just so that we understand what the basis of that study was? Because based on the last year, and the additional monies provided for those that went on unemployment temporarily and decided they were making more and stayed there, and then all of a sudden tried to come back for a job. I do know, as do my clients, that the more we can explain to them the benefit of this and et cetera for their future, as opposed to them just saying, oh, this is a cool thing and I'll always have a job.
Yeah.
Helps.
Yeah. Let me pull the study. I'm sure that it was linked to some website somewhere, and I will get that over to you guys so that you have that. And certainly happy to just provide you a copy of the illustration as well, so that you have kind of that little visual reminder of the stats.
Great. And actually, I have the slides that Jake had provided, so
Okay.
we got the visual, and that's perfect. So thank you.
Yep, no problem.
Yeah, this is Diana. I really appreciate this presentation, this deeper dive. Really, it gave me a much better look at this whole process. I'm very impressed with the amount of service that you provide. How big is your team?
We have 9 people on our team, 7 people that do what I do.
So do you find that a lot of the claims end up moving into this return to work phase and get very more involved?
Probably a good percentage of them do, but probably a lot of them just kind of resolve on their own, especially if it's minor injuries. And, there are many claims that don't have any restrictions at all, but things cross my desk when there are restrictions and either the employer can't figure out how to get them back to work because they just, they don't know what modified duty might exist, or they don't understand the process, or the injured worker is not super jazzed about returning. Those are the ones I'm dealing with most often.
Right. I mean, you mentioned the more communication, the better. Well, communication can be, it can get a little bit difficult to navigate. So
Oh yeah.
sure, depending on the unique situation. Yeah.
Yeah, we know how difficult it can be. You know, you always can try, and if things don't go well, then that's what we're here for. We've got your back.
Yeah. Well, thank you. This was a great presentation.
Right. Well, seeing no more questions, Jordyn, again, I want to thank you for joining us today. We will do our best to get this posted in a timely manner, this recording, and we will have one more deep dive course coming up Tuesday of next week, which will finish out our partnership with Pinnacol for what has been a great kind of 6-part series. So Jordyn, Sylvia, thank you so much, and I hope to see everyone on Tuesday. Thank you.